In the world of virtual games, we discovered a unique male protagonist. He does not chase the craziness of killing monsters and upgrading, but instead chooses a leisurely game style. He became an unpopular archer. This 38-year-old office worker's only hobby is to enjoy a moment of tranquility while gaming. When he chose the profession of archer, he deliberately chose the most inconspicuous skills. His mind is very simple, he just wants other players to ignore him, so that he can immerse himself in the game world more easily. However, his leisurely plan seems to be interrupted by a gangster wearing golden armor. The gangster was dismissive of the male protagonist, thinking bows and arrows were rubbish, and even kicked him. Despite this, the male protagonist was not angry, because he knows the importance of virtual games. The male protagonist decided to come to the training ground to improve his skills. At first, his archery skills kept missing the target, but he did not give up easily. After 2.5 hours of hard training, the male protagonist successfully improved his archery skills to level 5. In the process of continuously improving his skills, the male protagonist finally stepped out of the training ground and faced the adventure in the wild. However, he unexpectedly found that the wilderness was overcrowded, which hindered his original training plan. In the crowded situation, the male protagonist had no choice but to turn his attention to the wild grass. He began to collect various precious herbs. By turning on the far-sighted skill, he successfully discovered traces of various herbs. After identifying these herbs, the male protagonist decided to purchase pharmaceutical tools and embark on an adventure of making recovery potions. Luckily, he learned the one-click production skill in one go, but due to the fierce competition in the potion market, he found that selling potions has become extremely difficult. After the crowds in the wild gradually dispersed, the male protagonist met a mysterious one-horned rabbit. Although he tried to fight with a bow and arrow, the unicorn rabbit nimbly dodged the attack. This unexpected battle attracted the attention of 2 other players. One of them laughed so hard at the weird noise made by the one-horned rabbit. 2 players joined the male protagonist's adventure team. One of them is a red-haired man who laughs uncontrollably at the weird noise of the one-horned rabbit. The other one is a relatively normal blue-haired man. After the 3 became friends, the male protagonist continued to improve his skills. During the training process, he accidentally discovered his wind magic. He successfully used it to defeat enemies that the bow and arrow could not deal with. And when using concealment skills, I experienced a unique pleasure for players. It is worth mentioning that in the game, players actually have a sense of taste. The male protagonist found that the bread sold by the NPC was really unpalatable, so he decided to cook it himself. However, the process of frying and seasoning the steak was not as he expected, and the taste was not ideal. Having learned from the past, the male protagonist cleverly cut off the meat tendons and used spices to remove the smell. As a result, it tasted much better this time. Not satisfied with this, the male protagonist feels that he can still improve. So he put the 3rd piece of meat into water and boiled it until it was half cooked, then put it in the pot and fried it. This time the taste suddenly became attractive and fragrant. This attracted countless players. The male protagonist was forced to start business. His cooking level soared to level 20, and he learned the skill of cooking acceleration. In this way, he satisfies other players' needs for delicious food. Then the male protagonist decided to make a bow and arrow for himself. Although archers are considered a waste profession, but since almost no one was selling archer weapons, he decided to make his own. After 2.5 hours of production, the male protagonist finally succeeded in making a satisfactory weapon. Then he spent a lot of money to buy a set of armor, and prepared to practice with monsters in the wild. However, when he returned to town, he was surprised to find that players were all asking for potions. The male protagonist looked confused and found out after asking Hong Mao. It turns out that all MPG potions in the city have been sold out, causing players to fall into chaos. The male protagonist with pharmaceutical skills has become everyone's hope. Although he originally just wanted to live a leisurely gaming life, reality forced him to open a business. Soon there were only 3 bottles of potions left in his hand, and players who had not bought them could only leave in despair. Unexpectedly, the gangster suddenly appeared and wanted to buy the remaining potion by force. However, the male protagonist refused because he was waiting in line, so the gangster wanted to use force to solve the problem. This behavior directly caused public outrage. The hero advised him not to mess around. If NPC no longer sells equipment in the future, the source of equipment can only rely on living players. If he becomes an enemy of everyone present, no one will be willing to sell equipment to him in the future. The gangster didn't want to listen to the truth, so he challenged the male protagonist to a duel. The male protagonist happened to want to beat him up, so he decisively agreed. As the duel began, the gangster struck first, and struck with a sword. The male protagonist moved half a step to avoid the attack, then draw the bow and arrow to kill it instantly, and win easily. At the end, the male protagonist scared the gangsters and fled with just one look. All players said it was awesome. Since the potion incident, players have accepted the fact that NPCs will also be out of stock. This also makes pharmaceutical skills indispensable. On this day, the male protagonist was invited by Hong Mao into his guild. Among them, the white-haired girl is an assassin who mainly uses short swords. Seeing that the male protagonist was stunned, Hong Mao reminded him specifically not to mention words like flat chest in front of her. The male protagonist shouted directly, almost blurting it out. The remaining 2 members are the tank and the swordsman respectively, The male protagonist needs no introduction at all. After all, he is famous now and his previous PK video has gone viral. Just because he used the most useless profession to perform high-playing operations. The male protagonist felt guilty for a while. He just wants to play games in a low-key manner, and doesn't want to be in the limelight. At this time the male protagonist raised a question. There are now 4 vanguards and a magician. It seems a bit unbalanced if we add archers. White hair means Millie can use multi-attribute magic, and since I have learned recovery magic I can also serve as an assistant. The male protagonist didn't he expect Bai Mao to be so strong. Their goal today is to hunt the violent wild bear, which is a very difficult monster. Seeing Hong Mao's confidence, the male protagonist couldn't help but complain. The male protagonist calls him outrageous. The violent wild bear is not only agile but also highly intelligent. Isn't this a proper way to give away someone's head? After talking a lot, it turned out that Hong Mao wasn't listening at all. He is even looking forward to eating the male protagonist's food after it's over. Then he came to the forest, and the male protagonist used his long-sightedness to discover wild bears, but most of them acted in groups. But he soon found a lone one. The male protagonist immediately activated his concealment skills upon seeing this. He quickly came behind the monster and launched his falcon arrow to hit the monster. Just when the monster is about to attack the male protagonist, the tank immediately activates its taunting skills to pull back the hatred value in time. The hatred value is the hidden value that attracts the anger of monsters. As long as the tank player holds the aggro, the teammates can safely output. However, when a tank player is taking damage, the auxiliary position must keep the tank's health bar healthy. This time Bai Mao jumped up and used his backstab skill. As a result, the monster's skin was too hard to penetrate. The other melee combatants also faced the same problem. Melee immediately chanted upon seeing this and threw a single target high-explosion flame gun, and the effect was immediate. But it also attracted hatred. Fortunately, the tank used taunts to bring back the hatred in time, and Bai Mao's recovery magic stabilized the health bar. The blue bar doesn't seem good, and it will be bad if it continues like this. Male protagonist can only take a gamble when he sees this. He determined where the weakness was and shot the monster between the eyebrows with an arrow. He thought he succeeded, but he didn't expect that the monster was not only not dead but also became more violent. When everyone was in despair, the male protagonist stood up. Is this the unique skill of a melee archer? And Millie threw the flame gun again, hit the monster, and then killed it. Hong Mao apologized to his teammates. He didn't expect the violent wild bear to be so difficult to beat. Seeing that the atmosphere was a little low, the male protagonist asked everyone to eat first. He brought new dishes. When everyone heard this, they were immediately possessed by foodies. New dish is grilled lamb kebabs with the fragrance of lemon and herbs, which makes everyone want it. Bai Mao wanted to buy the male protagonist's cooking formula. The male protagonist said that production players have a rule not to trade formulas, just because it takes a lot of money and time to make the recipe. The formula is the result of hard work and creativity. Even if someone imitates it, they can't cook the same quality food. This time Hong Mao suggested that the male protagonist sell the food to them at a cheap price. Male protagonist said it was impossible, but everyone agreed with Hong Mao's suggestion. He hit it off immediately without waiting for the male protagonist to refuse. The male protagonist and his new teammates added each other as friends, and then went offline to rest. Next day, the hero met a bee in the forest. As a result, the arrow he shot was dodged by it, and just hit the rock ant with chain characteristics. Next second, piles of rock ants appeared. At this point, the male protagonist can only use his strongest killing move. Unexpectedly, rock ant not only reflects damage, but can also cause him to be paralyzed. Male protagonist was beaten to death by the ants. Male protagonist received an update announcement just after he was resurrected, and an event called Fairy Ball will be updated. Not only does it have new skills and new tricks, but it can also obtain fairy pets to support the player. Subsequently, in order to improve his strength, the male protagonist learned blacksmithing skills, made arrows that could shoot through eyeshadow, and piled spear-type arrows that were used to knock down prey. These are all tools for the male protagonist's revenge. Later, in order to improve the power of kicking skills, the male protagonist made a pair of foot blades. Players watching on the side said it was awesome, and they couldn't tell whether it was a shoe or a weapon. Next step is to make a bow. Short bows are good but have short range. Though the range and power of the longbow have been improved, its backswing is longer, and is not suitable for fighting alone. After thinking for a moment, he decided to make a hunting bow. He was inspired again while sorting out the materials. The mold was hammered into shape. The male protagonist successfully made an X-shaped compound hunting bow. He tried it and found that it felt good. Next day, the male protagonist couldn't wait to come to the forest, and soon found a lone rock ant. He fully drew the bowstring and charged up an arrow to shoot out, directly killing the rock ant. He added another armor-piercing arrow to kill it. Male protagonist then wiped out the rock ants, and then returned to the town with the loot. Fairy Ball event officially begins the next day. First half is about making a contract with the goblin. Male protagonist takes a deep breath and starts the summoning ceremony. Saw the crystal twisting in the air for 2.5 minutes, and cracked directly in the next second. Male protagonist also collapsed together. Seeing other summoning fairy pets, the male protagonist immediately lost confidence. This time Millie comforted him. After all, it was only the first half and maybe there was still a chance for the second half. The summoning crystal has not disappeared. Doesn't this mean it can still be summoned? Recently, the male protagonist is always approached by goblins for no apparent reason, and there are often goblins who want to come to his door and give him away for free. The male protagonist was unable to conclude a contract with him because the crystal of his contract was broken. On the other hand, fairies seem to have a special liking for crystals. The skill level increases, the male protagonist successfully unlocks advanced skills so that his combat power can be improved again. Male protagonist then prepares to explore the dungeon. Sensed the trap through my skills as soon as I entered. Male protagonist decisively chooses to avoid it. Halfway through, a red light suddenly appeared in the darkness. Male protagonist took a closer look, and as the light spot moved, a spider jumped out the next second. Male protagonist did not panic at all. He directly drew his bow and arrow and knocked it back with one arrow. Immediately launched the wind blade magic to hit. Thought he was safe, but unexpectedly the spider turned over and rushed towards the male protagonist. Male protagonist immediately used his new skills to jump up to avoid the attack, but he used too much force and hit the ceiling. Male protagonist then took out a whip, tied it up, and pulled it back, killing the spider with just one kick. Yen bows and arrows are only used to attack monsters, and you have to get close to fight them. At this moment, a group of goblins appeared on the ground. Male protagonist felt that they seemed to be guiding him, so he chased after them decisively. Passing a cliff, the male protagonist saw more fairies. The moment he stepped forward, the goblins dispersed, revealing a stone. Male protagonist moved away and got a box. It's only an old ring inside, which looks a bit like some kind of base. The system sent an announcement that the second half of the fairy dance event was called Fairy Dance Party. It will be fought in a special PvP mode. After victory, the goblin can evolve into a new form, but it cannot evolve if you only play against the same player. Top 16 can qualify for the knockout round. Winner will receive generous bonuses, and a title system will be added after the update. Titles can be obtained according to different gameplay. In addition, players whose contracts have failed can repair damaged contract crystals through special PvP battles. The success rate of the regeneration contract is 100, and there is a high probability that rare fairies will appear. It makes many players who have failed contracts excited. Male protagonist is naturally one of them. Suddenly, a new town, Nexia, has appeared, which is where most PvP players gather. Next day, the male protagonist was surrounded by onlookers as soon as he went online. It makes the male protagonist confused. Male protagonist had nothing to say until he opened the title panel. The hell kind of title is this? This is simply a public execution. Suddenly remembered that he could change his title just by playing a PvP game. He loudly asked if anyone was willing to fight him. This time a pop-up window appeared and the male protagonist burst into tears of joy. The party is a girl named Lorna, and she is also a member of the Red Hair Guild. She's a fighter, so she is looking forward to fighting against melee archers. When the hero wanted to agree to the duel, Lorna's fairy suddenly flew over. Looked at the male protagonist with eyes full of love. When the male protagonist looked confused, it directly cancelled the duel invitation. Guy is truly a goblin heart thief. No matter how many times the male protagonist tried, he was rejected by the fairy pet without exception. It made the hero hate the official. Subsequently, the male protagonist received a private message from Rona while making food. She wanted to ask the male protagonist for something. Before she could speak, the male protagonist guessed that it was because the pet refused to eat. She wants him to help make goblin food. Or how the male protagonist guessed it. Because there are a bunch of players in front of him who want to buy fairy food. The cause of the matter was that a player's pet refused to eat the bread sold by the NPC. He wants to ask the male protagonist to help him make goblin dishes. Cook it is natural for the male protagonist to do so. So quickly made a dish that satisfied the goblin. Turned out to be overcrowded. And with the help of Lorna, the male protagonist satisfied everyone's needs. The number of players who can make goblin dishes also increases, so the male protagonist can close the shop. Lorna invited the hero to go to a new town together. As soon as the two arrived in Nexia, they saw someone having a PvP duel not far away. Players in the barrier each brought their own goblins, and the male protagonist could tell at a glance that something was wrong with Firewolf. Duel began. The yellow-haired goblin took the lead in attacking. Knowing that the magic was being resisted, Huang Mao raised his sword and started to fight hard. Two sides fought back and forth. After the armored man repelled Huang Mao, he commanded the Firewolf to activate magic. Firewolf ignored this. Subsequently, Huang Mao's goblin hit the armored man with 100,000 volts, and Huang Mao took the opportunity to kill him with the sword. This time Lorna was curious why the goblin didn't obey the command. The protagonist explained that it was because the armored man used the goblin as a slave. By beating and scolding it for a long time will it become disobedient. It can be regarded as karma. To be players who abused goblins for a long time, and as punishment the players would fight the goblins. This time the goblin will become a complete body after defeating the player. The contract crystal will be taken back by the goblin. Data related to the fairies will also be cleared. And in armor should also know about this, so he didn't dare to take action. Lorna knew nothing about it. Because most of today's games are more friendly to players, they seem to want to create the feeling of previous MMOs. The protagonist then bid farewell to Lorna and went offline to rest. The protagonist was tidying up the shop the next day. The moment the man in armor from yesterday found him. Because he saw the title of the male protagonist, he wanted to ask how to live in harmony with the goblins. Turns out that he didn't know anything about it either. Saw someone on the internet training goblins in the same way as an animal trainer. He could just follow the instructions, but after the system was updated, the goblin became self-aware. Becomes like this. So told him that as long as he treats the goblin as a friend, they'll fight together, and he can actually feel the concern from time to time. With goblins is also a good way. Subsequently, after careful cooking by the male protagonist, a delicious fried rabbit meat was served. The goblin eating the food in his hand, and the armored man cried with joy. This time the black energy on the goblin's body has long since disappeared. Certain forest cabin, the male protagonist and an old man came here alone. Man is equipped with the best equipment, which shows that he should be a top player. Man asked the hero if he had ever seen a man named Goulade. The protagonist recalled it, and said no. Man explained that Goulade seemed to be targeting players with the title of Elf Heart Thief. The hero might have seen him. Turns out that Goulade was originally a member of the old man's team, although there were some problems with his words and deeds. Tank, he is quite capable. Strength increases, he looks down on other team members more and more. The fairy activities, he was the only one in the team whose contract failed. Result, when his teammates wanted to comfort him, he felt that they were gloating about his misfortune. Fatal thing is the old man's comfort, just because his contracted fairy is actually the Valkyrie of Light. Caused Goulade to become even more angry. The activity updates in the past few days have regenerated his contract crystal, attracted a dark demon fox, and then started looking for people to do PvP. Man guessed that he wanted to make a splash in the elimination round on the last day. Man reminds the male protagonist to be careful of Goulade. The protagonist expressed his gratitude, and then the old man left with the goblin. The protagonist went hunting in the wild the next day, and the hunting target turned out to be a wild bear. The protagonist directly drew the bowstring to full capacity, took a slight aim, and shot an arrow into the middle of the wild bear's eyebrow, causing him to scream in pain. The protagonist drew his bow and knocked an arrow again. After calculating the distance to the wild bear, he activated his new skill. The bear, who almost killed them as a group before, was killed by the male protagonist alone. The system pops up a window prompting that the kicking skill can be evolved. The protagonist made a decisive decision and gained the sliding sprint skill after evolving. Simply a magical skill of surprise attack and escape. Oh, how many players will be kicked away in the future? Male protagonist came to the mine to dig up some iron and light metals to build new gadgets. Pickaxe continued to strike. The male protagonist unexpectedly dug out an exploding stone. The players on the side and quickly found cover. If it explodes, it will be as powerful as a hydrogen bomb. Only the male protagonist recovered it in time, thus avoiding a tragedy. Male protagonist came to the forge where he planned to make spiral arrowheads and metal whips. He put the material into the fire for hot forging and then hammered it into shape. Any failures, the male protagonist finally succeeded in making a spiral arrow. Ate a metal whip. He first hot forged a light metal and then took it out for hammering. 49 times of repeated hot forging and hammering, the triangular whip blade was produced. Hit by this whip, you may die or you will have to shed your skin. The protagonist then planned to process explosive stones. There is a risk of self-explosion. The male protagonist still wants to try using his pharmaceutical skills. Careful debugging, he successfully produced 3 bottles of test products. Went to the wild to test the effect. The bottle only smokes but does not explode. The second bottle shattered. There was a big explosion, leaving a big hole on the ground. Rarely named this Hell Oil. Took out the last bottle of test product. Both the firepower and range are perfect, just the ideal ratio for the male protagonist. He named it Enhanced Oil. Mass production. The male protagonist went to the wild and threw it directly at 3 wild bears. The protagonist suddenly realizes that if he relies too much on bombs, his skills will not be upgraded. And the system shows that 2 skills have reached level 50 at the same time, and the hidden mechanism is triggered. Use the 2 and evolve into the hunting bow. You can learn exclusive tricks. You will not be able to learn bow hunting and win magic skills in the future. The protagonist decided to merge and evolve after thinking for a while. The male protagonist began to experience new skills. Guns and arrows. A male protagonist to shoot in rapid succession. But accuracy is a bit low. The skill is flying, which allows the male protagonist to jump high and float briefly in the air. The very good auxiliary skill. The round officially begins the next day. The competition venue was crowded with people. The male protagonist activated the far-sighted scanning skill. He found 2 players with the title of Fair Thief. The male protagonist very happy. And begins the duel between players is also very exciting. Both of them fails. The protagonist discovers that the defeated goblin will hand over the particles of light to the victorious party. And his PvP did not have this effect. Is there any significance to it? As players continued to compete, the final decisive game soon came. The people in the decisive game are the old man and Goulard. Between the two will be resolved once again. As down ended, both of them rushed towards each other, and the old man's move was seen through by Goulard. An attack was easily received by the old man, and the goblins on both sides released their magic at the same time in the next second. But ult is indifferent. At the end, the old man's goblin released its skill and hit Goulard. When Anne saw this, he immediately used the crescent moon slash but was dodged